Okay, we have a quorum. This is not my normal voice, God, it's worse. And I'm going to call this meeting to order. The first item on the agenda always is citizens' concerns. Anybody with concerns that are not on our agenda can approach the mic and address them. Yes, Mr. Martin. You must identify yourself.
Hi, I'm David Martin. I live on High Street. Will there be a time during where you guys are approving the warrant for input, or is this my only chance for input?
Well, I'll be flexible. You can make comments during, what we're doing with the warrant is pretty limited, but, it's open and closing. But I think the substantive discussion is going to be at our next meeting where we actually will opine about the substance of the articles. But, we're not really inflexible and unreasonable. And if you have something to say.
Should I say it now or later?
You might as well, since you're here, you may say it now.
So I attended the planning board, the last planning board meeting, where I advocated for the zoning change for private parking facilities in the South Acton Village District. I advocated for it by special permit rather than by right. I think that was important. And then the public hearing part of the meeting ended, and this is probably my own fault, and the planning board went on to approve the article, and I tried to give further input, but the public hearing portion of the meeting was already closed. And I think that the article, as in the draft warrant now, is wholly inadequate. There are no criteria by which to judge a special parking facility, a parking facility in South Acton. So there are a huge number of problems with that. One is who's to say whether the judgment by the planning board for one landowner would be fair with respect to an application by another landowner. There's no criteria in there. The criteria for normal building projects really doesn't apply to parking facilities. This is not a building, and things that normally don't enter into the planning board's sphere of judgment, like how does one pay for the parking facility, which can have a dramatic impact on traffic, are not even mentioned here. And there's no criteria at all. And in fact, none of the research has been done at all as to what the criteria might be. At our last, I'm also chair of SATSAC. At the last SATSAC meeting.
And we have your recommendation, yeah.
The members of SATSAC expressed a variety of concerns of possible unintended consequences of the article as it currently exists, from people paving half of their front lawns to add 4 more parking spaces throughout the South Acton Village District, to impacts on traffic. We started to build a list in SATSAC, but it's by no means a comprehensive list. So the bottom line here is this issue, I believe, and SATSAC believes, needs much more study, and we would advocate that it not be on the fall town meeting warrant.
Okay, thank you. We'll take that under consideration when we get to that part of the agenda. Any other citizens' concerns? Okay. With everybody's forbearance, I'm going to go through my chairman's update before I completely lose my voice. But let me see. The Senior Center had their open house today with the groundbreaking between 1 and 4 p.m. attracted a very big crowd. There was a ribbon cutting and remarks by celebrities, including the manager, the town manager. There were all sorts of really good nibbles. The facility is spectacular. If some of you haven't been there, even if you're seniors, I think you can go and visit. But it has been well worth the wait after years and years of trying to get an expanded senior center. Not just lots more space, but really well laid out and really nicely appointed, and windows all around. Anyhow, the town manager search committee has a survey. It's on the town website. They're looking for input from everybody in town about the major issues and challenges facing the town, and also what qualities people would like to see in the next town manager. In case some of you haven't heard, Mr. Ledoux will be retiring effective the end of next June, so we have to find somebody new, much as we would like to keep him on indefinitely. If you don't know how to get to the town website and you have your computer, you can go to acton-mass.gov/TMSS, or you can simply email your remarks to TMSC, S as in Sam, C, at acton-mass.gov. The deadline for commenting is Friday, November 10th. The Acton-Boxborough School District public information sessions are continuing about the school building proposal that everybody will hear on Friday, December 4th at special town meeting. There's further information about the specific places and meeting dates on the town website. The planning board will be having a hearing on the proposed article for the temporary moratorium on recreational marijuana establishments on Tuesday, November 7th at 7:30 p.m. in this room. And finally, Halloween is tomorrow night, and in Acton, the witching hours are officially 6 to 8 p.m. Mr. Manager.
Thank you. And just a slight correction, it's actually the Senior Center and Human Service Center, because there are because nursing, the social outreach worker, DVSN, Veteran Services are all up there as well. And some may be wondering what all these jack-o'-lanterns are out there. We're actually tomorrow judging these. There's a town employee pumpkin carving contest. Last year, if you may remember, they were the contest was to guess who I was at Halloween, which was Darth Vader. So this is our attempt to get employees excited about the holiday. I attended the International City Management Association annual meeting in San Antonio last week. I did receive my 40th year award, or 40 years in the business. It's a scary number, I have to say. There were, believe it or not, 72 of us out of I don't know how many managers around the world. I know there were 3,600 at the conference, but 72 of us got 40-year awards, which goes to show there's a lot of turnover going to be happening in the city and town manager ranks in the very near future. We received notice today from the Green Communities program that based on our energy consumption data, we have reduced our energy through all the town buildings by 26% over the 5 years that we have been a green community. The goal was to reduce by 20%. So in one of our upcoming meetings, our regional coordinator of green communities, Kelly Brown, will be coming to present us with an award signed by the governor. So certainly good news, and I know our departments have worked very hard to try to reduce our energy, and that's a good example. One other thing I wanted to bring up, and something that the police chief and I have been talking about, and you may recall, we've had numerous hearings of liquor license violations over the last few years, some of which entailed watching video and executive session that took a long time. One of the ideas he and I have kicked around is to create a subcommittee, and the suggestion would be the chair of the selectmen, the chief of police, and the town manager to review some of these complaints and look at video to see if there are violations before they kind of are presented to the Board of Selectmen. So I don't know how the board feels about that, but I think fortunately, knock on whatever, we haven't had any violations lately, but this could streamline the process and not subject ourselves to watching an hour of video, which we have done in the past.
Did you want guidance right now, or?
Yeah. Well, we do have a pending one we may want to look at, so, yes.
Do people briefly have any thoughts one way or the other?
Sure, I think it's a good idea, because I think we found often that in watching the video, it's able to clarify whether this is an issue or not, and it's not a great use of 5 people's time to do that, so I think it's worthwhile, and also having the police chief being a part of that is important too, as they tend to know the issues better and would know what some of those visible signs are that a bartender should be looking for, and if that's present in the video.
Peter?
I'm sorry, you're just saying this is whether we watch the video or not, as opposed to whether you would actually bring a case?
We would look at the police report, watch video if video is pertinent, and maybe even interview bartenders, et cetera, to see if it was elevated enough to bring to the board.
Okay, so the decision would be whether to bring it to us in the first place,
Right.
not just bring it to us and not watch the video.
Right. Right.
Okay. I mean, I would suggest if you do bring something to us, if you watch the video, we don't need to look at 45 minutes. If you see something in the video that, you know, we should focus on, maybe you could just do it that way.
Anybody else? All right. We have a 7:10 p.m. Appointment change in manager, not your average Joe's. Is somebody here from? Yes. And I don't know if we have the information on our packet, and I don't know if the board wants to hear some comments first before we start from the proponent before we start asking questions. But if you want to introduce yourself and then just say a few words about what this application is about, that'd be great.
Madam Chair, you need to read the notice of hearing first.
Sorry, thank you. All right, notice is hereby given under Chapter 138 of the General Laws that the Board of Selectmen will hold a hearing in the Francis Faulkner Room in the Acton Town Hall on October 30, 2017 at 7:10 p.m. on the application of Not Your Average Joe's Inc. change in manager to Greg Whiting, manager for an all-alcohol license as a common victualler at 305 Main Street, Acton. Application is on file in the Selectmen's office and may be viewed during normal working hours. Yes. So if you want to proceed with your introduction.
Oh, yeah, my name is Greg Whiting, and I'm the GM at Not Your Average Joe's. You know, I don't know what you're looking for.
Okay.
To be honest with you.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I don't know if the board has questions or comments at this point. Anybody? Katie?
Sure, I mean, it was noted in your application that you had an arrest related to, I think, a possession of a classy narcotic, and then the memo that we had from the police chief noted that originally this wasn't on the application, and then it was listed not, or I guess, I mean, it wasn't. Could you speak a little bit more about that incident and why you think it wouldn't impact your ability to be the holder of the liquor license
Sure.
for this application?
When we first filed the application, it said on the application felonies. So I just misunderstood when I said felonies, because there was no felony. So we left it out because there was no felony involved. And then when we talked about it some more, because it was a misdemeanor with a narcotic, they said, oh, you have to put it in. So that's why I went back in. But then recently everything was expunged and sealed. 9 years ago, I was a teacher at a high school, and a student brought in a pill bottle with one pill in it. And he gave it to me, and he was a troubled kid. So instead of getting him in trouble, I put that bottle in my desk drawer and went about my day. And then some kids started talking back and forth about whatever they're talking about, and they started rumors that I was buying drugs off of kids, which was not true. So I had to go to court, and I took a deal to kind of end it and move forward, and that was it. And I paid a fine, and I had to do a probation for a year, and that was the repercussion from it. And 9 years later, I'm still answering for it.
Anybody else? Peter?
Actually, the question on the form is, have you ever been convicted of a state, federal, or military crime? It doesn't mention felonies that I can see there. And the other problem I have is the police chief has recommended that we not approve this. So, I mean, I have concerns about that.
Okay.
Joan? Jing-Sung? Yeah, I mean, I do have a concern. Our police chief has recommended that we not approve the change in manager. The police chief has access to information in the quarry file that is not available to us, and seemed very concerned about what he had read. I don't know if, you're willing to just, your perspective is what you just shared with us about the incident. And
Yeah.
you
That was it. There was nothing else to it.
all right. Does anybody have any other comments or perspective?
Yeah, I just have one other quick question. You said you had never been a manager of record of a license to sell alcoholic beverages. Is this your first manager position that you would take?
Oh, no, I've been a manager for over 10 years.
That's at Carabera's Italian Grill?
Yeah, Carrabba's, yeah.
Okay. You did say you never had been a manager. You checked no on that, so that's not accurate, I guess.
I didn't fill that form out. That was done by the home office. I sent in some stuff to them, and then
Okay.
they sent it out. So some of that stuff I don't know. I was a manager at Carrabba's. I was a managing partner. I was an executive chef.
Okay.
I was a kitchen manager.
And you didn't have any issues there with
No.
overservice or anything like that?
Nope.
Okay.
Did they have a liquor license at Carrabba's? And were you the manager?
I was not.
Okay, so that's a difference, Peter, is whether you're it's like a specific manager of the liquor license or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's tough for us, because when a police chief recommends not to approve this, it's very hard. So I don't know if it's worthwhile maybe to go back and meet with the police chief in person to talk about it, and maybe if you're able to describe it to him or something, he might understand more. But right now, I don't feel very comfortable approving this with a recommendation not to from the police chief.
While I'm at it, are there any questions or comments from the audience? I sometimes forget to do that, but all right. Peter, do you have any opinions one way or the other?
No, I'll just move that we deny, based on the chief's recommendation, the application for the change in manager at Not Your Average Joe's.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Peter, was that Joan?
Yes.
No, Joan, second. Any further discussion?
Your voice.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstaining. Thank you. And then that's it for appointments. The next item is under Selectmen's business. It's a site plan special permit. It's Weatherby Plaza. It's 107 to 115 Great Road. This is actually my assignment, and essentially it is a proposal. It's called a minor amendment, which is why a hearing with notice wasn't required. The planning director said that a hearing wasn't required, which means no notice to the abutters and that sort of thing. If people have questions about who would be the abutters, I think for the last meeting, I had a map that showed where the abutters were, and they're basically all, largely their businesses, but the change is within the periphery of the property, so it's not as if it's going to have a profound impact on them. But if people have concern about the fact that we're taking this as on Selectmen's business rather than pursuant to a hearing, I appreciate your saying so right now. Anybody? All right, well, essentially, you've read the packet. This is a proposal for the addition to the station master's house, which is that cute house where I guess Atier was most recently. I think there's another business there now, but to add, make an addition to the back for storage. I think it would be 2 stories. And you've got comments rather belatedly from the design review board, which has concerns about the size and the height of the building. But I don't know. I see Mr. Bertolami. I don't know if your engineer is here. Oh, gee.
Also without power in his home. So he did call me just a little while ago, and he just talked to the planning director, and the planning director said he was home keeping warm. And he said, I agree with that.
Oh, dear. All right, well,
So we've got some information. You have it on Docushare, but I prepared some other stuff. Would you like to take a look at it?
sure, if you want to hand things out. And then we also very, very late got, I got an email and I circulated it to people with photographs showing the different views of the building from the street and from the side.
Well, some of this is going to be in duplicate done.
Do you need extra copies made? Because if you need extra copies made, we at least.
That's the one we didn't have.
Oh, this is, yeah, okay. I've got an X, I don't have an X one. Oh, or is this,
From an architect, and then another whole package.
so this is, okay, this is more pertinent, this is more pertinent, okay,
Okay,
okay.
so maybe we can start.
Is there an extra one?
Oh, yeah, here.
This is what was in our packet.
Here, you can, that's, I think those are the old illustrations. So, Mr. Bertolami, I'll be formal. Perhaps you'd like to just describe what it is that you're, for the benefit of the audience, because they don't have any of these materials unless they've looked at our packet.
Okay.
Which a lot of people prefer not to do because they have better things to do with their lives, but anyhow. If you'd like to describe what you're proposing to do.
We're putting an addition, or plan to put an addition, on 115 Great Road, which is Boston Drum. They've been there a couple of years. Prior to that, for the previous 12 years, was a Tear Nail Salon. And basically, we have pictures, maps, and would you like me to send what I have in the audience? Does anybody would like to look at it? I have something here. But we're proposing an addition. You only have one colored map, but if you look at it, the area in green is the front building, and the area in orange is the rear building, so you can see the size. Now, if you look at the front building, that does include the handicap ramp, the double sets of stairs. There's 3 accesses to the apartment up on top of the original building, and plus first floor of Boston Drum, second floor apartment. So it just gives you an idea of size. There's a letter from one of the architects describing on what he did here. And realistically, I moved this building a bunch of years ago when it was just about falling down, and a group in town came and said, let's save it. And I said that probably easier said than done, but we put it on jacks and had a special town meeting, 287 to 1 for, 1 against, which was remarkable in itself. So we did save it. My point that I'm getting at there was not much left of the building. The Design Review Board asked, did you follow any historic guidelines and plans? Well, there are really none, because this was built on demolition delay. So the Historic Commission was out, and there wasn't that much of the original building that was salvageable. So what I did is I took a few of the overhangs and per se the shed dormers, front, side, and rear, and incorporated it to the new building. And when I was in front of the Design Review Board, probably what I should have mentioned is they should have maybe taken a look at the garage doors, because that's the largest amount of the front. And I did the side, back, and roof to take care of the original building. So there was no historic factor on the remodel the first time. Well, not the first time, back in the 1907, 8, 9, and 10. It was a Sears and Roebuck house. Back when I moved it a bunch of years ago and rebuilt it. So they're similar in a way. Garage doors throw it off a bit. There's also pictures in your plans of what you can see from the road and what you can't see from the road. And realistically, going west is the only time you can really see it. Going west would be Concord to Littleton, for anybody.
I would just add, Leo, that you only have one other set of photographs.
Okay.
Which is somewhere. So.
Okay, but I brought you one of these.
Yeah, you have 2 of these, but not every member of the board hasn't seen these.
Okay, would you like this one? I can go from
Well,
memory if you'd like.
if you can spare it, I mean, I think that, I don't know if everybody got to see the email that I circulated rather early.
Okay, why don't we, Steve, do you mind?
Rather late, rather today, with the photographs showing the different perspectives. But, oh, okay, that's good. But you are right that driving along Great Road from the Rotary, that's where you can really see the station master's house in silhouette and where the addition would be behind it. And so I think that DRB has a sense that the roof line of the addition behind will be visible if you're facing straight on. I mean, that was the question, was the height of the building, because you didn't have the proposed addition depicted in any of the plans relative to the existing building. So they had nothing to sort of gauge its size relative to the existing building. But that's what you've provided now. The difficulty is that the DRB hasn't really had a chance to study this. So it would be good to have their perspective with this additional information.
I totally plan to go to another meeting with DRB, which is Wednesday night at 7:30. They did not have a front view that they could see from 2A. As you look at that picture, clearly, you cannot see the building. The only way you can look at that structure is coming from Concord, and by the time you see the structure, you're turning into Weatherby Plaza, which I don't know if their design review boards say when they get to private property what it should look like, but nevertheless, we don't want to negotiate with that. We want to, take care of what they say. Can you see it from the road, from east to west, and so on? And basically not. And dead on, also not. And I will be there 7:30 Wednesday, and you can make that as, if you feel positive for this.
You're on the agenda?
Yes, I
Right,
am.
Okay. I guess you should understand that the Design Review Board is an advisory board to the Board of Selectmen, and they're advisory to us, but, frankly, one of the reasons that they exist and their mission or their responsibilities have been expanded is because the board has found their input to be very helpful with regard to development projects. And so, they're going to give us advice, and we will try to the extent that we can to incorporate the guidance in our decisions. Sometimes it doesn't always, the proponents or whatever aren't necessarily going to accept all of the guidance without change, but we do try to incorporate. So if without their advising us, they wouldn't have authority on their own to tell anybody what to do, but they do have some authority because they advise us and we have authority. One of the questions I thought would be helpful is if you could explain what is going to happen in the location where you're putting the addition, because there's, if I recall correctly, there's some parking. There are parking spaces there, and the building is going to kind of sit in an area where there's some parking. So what's going to happen? Do you have compensatory parking elsewhere? Or
We have, I believe, enough parking on the project, and we have spaces inside the building for parking. We're going to use it primarily for all the equipment that maintains the subject site, which is 5 acres, 9 buildings, and about 45,000 square feet now.
And would you explain the first floor? Is it going to be open, or is it just going to be first floors where you're going to store things, and then are you having a space on the second floor?
We're going to have the space with probably seasonal equipment, transits, things of that nature, chainsaws.
I mean, on the second floor?
Second.
It's going to be 2 floors, okay.
Yes.
All right. Are
On
there
a
any?
single-story building, it just doesn't look well. So I needed to put a second story. So we figured we'd put one up there and, use it along with our current use or uses that are approved in the East Acton Village District.
Okay, are there any questions or comments from the board? Katie?
Thanks, Leo. Just wanted to ask if you had seen the comments from the Water District that were in our packet and were comfortable with their...
I didn't see, Katie, what they said. Maybe you can tell me.
Yeah, I mean,
I had every right, every thought that I would have an engineer tonight. Sure. It's just unfortunate. But certainly, I have no problem, and I'd love to listen to what they say. And
yeah, no, I think it was their standard stuff about, but it just talked about, oh yeah, I think Roland's got the list there, so if you want to take a look. And then just for my clarification, this is an amendment, correct, to the site plan permit, and the original permit also had to do with adding that building near the, faux lighthouse, is that correct? And then I was just wondering if because you haven't built that yet, right?
the foundation is in on the Windmill Lighthouse.
Right, or Big Mill, right.
The contractor is dealing with Chris at Acton Water, and they're working out how we're going to run the water system itself. Let me just... This is boilerplate. What the fees are and so on. I have no problem with
Okay,
that.
excellent. I just wanted to make sure,
No, thank
in case
you.
we reference that in our approval. Okay, and so you are planning to still go forward with that other part?
We'll be
That's
there
by
Wednesday at 7:30, but I want you to really remember, their biggest problem was where the location was on this building, whether you could look at the front of the building on 2A, facing the building, and
Right.
see the other building. there's a clear picture of the other building on 2A. It's 7.5 feet higher from ground level to top of foundation. You cannot see it one bit. And the only way out of all the directions, unless you're getting a car wash, is pull off coming from Concord to Acton and pull into the plaza.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't have major concerns with that. I actually think it's fine. I agree with Janet, generally we want applicants to be able to have their review with DRB, so it's good that you're going back. I think we'd have to figure out whether we can close the hearing tonight without that or not. But no, my question was just, you are moving ahead with the building that was previously permitted by the
Foundation is in, and
Okay.
we're working with Acton Water District as we speak. The septic system is in. We have to make one more line and add a tank, but just normal construction via the permit.
Okay, great. Yeah, and then just one thing I noted, I think there was a incorrect date in the draft permit for us, Roland, just for you guys to note. I think it said our hearing was on like the 26th or something like that, but I figured you'd clean that up when you were putting that all together.
Yeah, all the dates have to be cleaned up for today, because it was originally, and yes, there was a mistake. It should have said 16 back then, yes. And some of the exhibits have to be added, because there's some more information that came up.
And if we wanted to continue discussion and not make a decision, we wouldn't have to talk about closing the hearing, because this isn't a hearing. It's just a discussion. And so it's a little more flexible. But any other comments or questions, the board? No? Okay. I have no comments other than what I know about from the design review board, so I don't know if we want to just hold off making our final decision so that then we can make a clean decision with the DRB's input, or Mr. Bertolami, what were your plans schedule-wise with regard to this addition? If you had to wait until the 13th?
A month ago. Mother Nature's setting in, we want to build this building.
You want to build it before this year? Okay, Mr. Bartle has something to...
We made the offer a few weeks ago to go in front of the selectmen without the design review because they weren't meeting. I said, well, we can wait another week. But the trouble is, and we appreciate the offer, another week turns into 4 weeks. So we would like, if you feel good about it, to vote for it, subject to a trip back to the design review board. And I've answered all their questions. When they see, it's on Docushare, so I'm sure they've seen it, but the hearing is Wednesday.
I forwarded it to them, the latest stuff that just came in today. But of course, the difficulty for us is if DRB sees it and contradicts what you're saying about the height or other things, the visuals impact of it.
It's impossible on a view of the building dead on. You can either see the building behind it or you can't. You cannot see it via those pictures.
All right, hold on.
It's pretty cut and dry.
Mr. Bartle has a comment. Thanks.
In the planning department, we share different projects for review. I'm the one who's familiar with this. I'm going to be leaving for Germany this week, and I won't be back until middle of November. And then comes Thanksgiving, and I'm going to go on holiday then too. So there's a possibility I may not be able to actually draft or give you the final version of a decision on this matter until after Thanksgiving if the matter gets postponed further. I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay, Peter?
If you got the permit in 2015, why did it take you 2 years and then you come to us, 2 weeks before you want to start building?
We didn't get the permit in 2015 for this building. It was another building. And we were working out, not so much water, but we're working out gas. And I think what we've done to that other building that the foundation we talked about is in, we're going to go with propane, which I've never done before in my life, but I think it's time to try. So we've got that problem out. That's why we're on and running and building.
So that's the building that Katie was... Yeah. That's the building Katie was talking about, okay.
Katie, was that the one?
That's what we originally permitted, was the part that's like an addition to the windmill.
Yes, 111, that's the
area.
one.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and then this is an amendment to that. I'm fine. I agree. I don't think that there's a major visual impact. I think it's worthwhile to go back to DRB, but I'm fine approving this tonight. So I would make a motion to approve the site plan special permit amendment to 107, 115 Great Road.
Second.
Yeah. Okay,
Katie moves and Joan seconds. Yes, Peter?
I'm just going to offer an amendment on the condition that Mr. Bartolome go before the design review board and consider any comments they might have about changes.
Sure, I'll add that to my motion.
Okay, and before we vote, I want to invite comments or questions from the audience, if any.
Hi, Jim Snyder Grant, 18 Half Moon Hill. This is a special permit process, yes? So does that mean that bicycle parking is required here?
This is an amendment to a special permit, so I think in the original special permit, yes, but this is an amendment.
But maybe it came before the bylaw that required bicycle parking? Anyway, I'm just curious about that. Thanks.
When did the bicycle bylaw go into effect?
What did I
Because
miss?
I think the original site plan special permit predates the bike parking bylaw adoption. I think the last time I saw the site did have bicycle parking. It didn't exactly meet the design specifications that the bylaw today requires. This particular addition is, 90% garage. And so parking spaces that are created in a garage don't trigger bicycle parking requirements. So that's why it didn't come up in our review as a matter.
all right. I just had one question, Leon. What were you doing with the equipment that you now want to store in this proposed addition before? Or what are you doing with it right now?
We have it spread around between the plaza and other locations. I mean, like the loader and the bobcat and the tools and equipment and
Whatever it is that
everything
you...
it takes to run. It's everywhere.
Okay. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye with the change that Peter suggested.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you. And I'll probably, if you're going to be at DRB on Wednesday, I will be there too.
We'll be there.
But make sure, see if you can get George to come too.
I don't know if we'll get George, but you know what we might do? Why don't we try to get Sven? That way there, if there's a design change, he can talk about it.
Okay,
There's not an engineering change because we've done
okay,
the foundation plan.
yeah.
Is that all
Well,
right?
Sven is the architect, right?
One of them,
Yeah, that's good.
okay?
And then they can all talk architect at DRB, that'll be good,
All
yeah,
talk
okay.
architecture with all the design review board, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, you're welcome to come if you'd like. Can I collect back what I gave you, or do you want to keep those? Just give them, yeah, keep whatever you want. Whatever you, if you're going to throw it away, I'll give it to the design review board.
Oh, these are comments.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
All right, next item is CrossTown Connect update. Mr. Halley, you refuse to retire. Thank goodness for us.
Good evening, everyone. I just thought I'd drop in, say hi. We wanted to give you an update on CrossTown Connect because a lot of good things have been happening. But first, I thought I might sort of explain how CrossTown Connect came to be. So back in 2012, 4 communities, along with Clock Tower Place, applied for a Community Innovative Challenge grant. We were awarded $182,000. And through that process, we started to look at how could we address transportation issues together in a partnership and start looking at the needs of the communities and finding different transportation methods for doing that. We were very successful in doing that, and in September of 2013, CrossTown Connect opened its offices at Clock Tower Place. And at that point in time, we had Acton, Boxborough, Littleton, and Maynard, along with Clock Tower Place as our partners. So what is Clock Tower Place? Well, it's a private partner transportation management association. It's very unique in Massachusetts. We are the first one that has combined both a public and private effort. There's a lot of transportation management associations in the Boston 128 area, but they're very organized in terms of the businesses that they're servicing. They don't really implement the communities within the programs. So we're serving the communities and businesses that we feel want to help with the transportation challenges, that are looking at the Fitchburg rail line, that are looking at the 495 Route 2 intersection. And so we're trying to see how we can get those businesses to work together in developing some of the local transportation services. We're also advocating for transportation resources and legislation that is beneficial for our efforts. Currently, our public partners include Acton, Boxborough, Concord, Littleton, Maynard, Sudbury, and Westford. So from 4 communities, we've grown to 7. From 1 business, we've grown to 8. We have 2 in Acton, AES down in Post Office Square, West Acton Village Works, plus a couple in Westford, in Littleton, and in Maynard. The Clock Tower Place is now Mill and Main. So we have been very successful reaching out to businesses and adding them to our organization. So what have we accomplished? Well, since 2012, we've been able to receive more than $1 million worth of grants to help support our work. As I mentioned, we're the first public-private TMA in Massachusetts. We've successfully advocated for utilization of parking fees for shuttle services. As you might remember, at one point we were earning income at the parking lot and we couldn't spend it for anything other than upkeep of the parking lot. Well, now the parking lot is paying for the rail shuttle, and it's an expense the town doesn't have to worry about. We also implemented shared ride services across regional transit authority borders. Some of our communities are part of MART, the Montechusett Area Regional Transit. Some of our communities are part of Lowell Regional Transit Authority. Believe it or not, they don't like to see their riders traveling from one regional transit area to another. So we had to go to the state, and we ended up signing an agreement with MassDOT and the 2 RTAs that would allow a passenger in any one of our serving communities to get on any one of the vans and go to any place that we deliver people to. It took us almost 18 months to accomplish that. It seemed kind of simple. We've also implemented fixed route service going from Mill and Main to the South Acton train station, and that's been very successful. We're up to about 100, 125 riders per week on that service. And we're in the process of implementing a shuttle service that would go from Juniper Networks in Westford and stop at IBM in Littleton and go to the Littleton train station. That is currently being worked out with MART. So we have been very successful in implementing some of our strategies. I have with me tonight Scott Sudeikis, who is our director of CrossTown Connect. He works for Transaction Associates, which is a company we've contracted with, and he'll go into more details in terms of the types of services we're providing.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk mostly about the services we provide to the businesses. I think Doug has covered some of the community services better. But so kind of what we do We have a central dispatching location where we have 2 full-time dispatchers. Previously, before the central dispatching went into effect, we had usually a COA director or somebody that worked at a COA doing like a couple hours a day of dispatching. And this allows us to give people more flexibility to call whenever they want, you know, during a work day. So it's open from 8:30 to 4, and it's really increased ridership and given people more flexibility and confidence that they're going to get somebody on the other end of the line. That's been a really positive, and it also allows us to look at the system as a whole, so we can say, well, we don't have any Acton vans available, but maybe we can take the Maynard van and pick somebody up in Acton. So it's the software that we use has really helped us to make our system more efficient. And then we are also developing and implementing commuter shuttles like Doug mentioned. We've also got a couple other ideas for them that we're kind of waiting on. It's not the right time yet, but we're thinking about one from possibly in Boxborough to the South Acton train station. And so those are kind of ongoing, identifying those routes and implementing them as we see the needs. And then we get, as Doug mentioned, grant awards offset a lot of the fees. The interesting thing about our public-private partnership is it really helps to leverage all kinds of different resources to the same end, basically. You know, businesses want to get people to their locations and back home, and you know, towns want to get people around town, and we just kind of try to combine those services when we can, or at least sometimes use a vehicle for one service early in the morning and then use it for town services later or something like that, and then again in the evening. And so we also assist larger businesses to meet the rideshare regulation. That's a Massachusetts regulation that if you're over a certain amount of people, you have to at least make an effort to reduce your single occupancy vehicle use of your employees. So that TMAs typically can help that. It actually is in the language of the law, where if you are in a TMA, that helps to fulfill that regulation, because that's what we're trying to do, is reduce single occupancy vehicles. We also provide emergency ride home, which is kind of, we look at it as like an insurance policy for carpoolers, but essentially it's a free service that member companies get, and if you carpool to work and your child gets sick when you're at work and you don't have your car there, that's one reason people might not carpool. So this is a service where you can call and a car will show up within a half hour and get you where you need to go. So, I mean, it could be, we had somebody a month ago that was just incredibly sick and had van pooled and needed to get home quickly. So that's another thing that really helps people to get over that line and to jump in a carpool or a van pool. We also have ride matching. We work with the state, actually. They work with a company called New Ride, and it's an online database where you can go on there and it'll actually match you to other people that have a similar commute. So you say, I leave my house at 7:30 in the morning and I show up at Juniper Networks or whatever at this time. And if somebody is roughly, you know, nearby, maybe within a quarter mile, it'll like match you up with them. So that's another incentive that we offer to our business partners. We also do transportation events and marketing just to promote these services at member companies. As Doug mentioned, usually a TMA is started with a group of businesses to address certain transportation issues, and so like we're a little unique in that the towns were kind of the first ones to start this effort, but it seems to be working well. So And then also surveying and data analysis. We'll go into a company and just ask for anonymous zip codes, and based on those we can create a heat map and find out if there may be a place where a van pool could be formed or something like that. So if you're like, oh, there's 15 people coming from Fitchburg going to this certain company, then that would be a logical place to maybe try to start a van pool. Big picture goals for the effort are mostly, we're trying to cut down on single occupancy vehicles, trying to reduce congestion, air pollution, make people healthier, and it's an economic development thing. We're trying to make it easy for companies to locate here, and some of them, a lot of, especially millennials, don't want to drive a car, so, or even have a car. So this is kind of a more and more important thing as time goes on. We also provide a variety of commuting options that can help employees attract and retain top talent, as I just kind of alluded to. First mile, last mile, and reverse commute is kind of our big push right now. We're doing that with a lot of these services we're doing are with community resources, meaning shuttles. Like I mentioned, we'll start early in the morning and then go into regular town service from the typical hours, whether it be 8 to 4, or it depends on the town. And then go back. Some of the companies do have private shuttles that they'll use as well, but we're really trying to flex these resources that are in the towns. We're also working to promote, it's a green, initiative as well. And one of the great things about TMAs, I think, for companies is that it really helps pool the resources. So one company may not be able to afford a shuttle. Shuttles are quite expensive, actually. But if 5 companies can get together that are all in one office park, it's a win-win, because they're all paying a lot less and they're still getting the service. So that's kind of where TMAs came from, I would say. We can also help companies with some of their on-site programs, like pre-tax benefits, parking, preferential parking for green vehicles or carpools, things like that. And just to give you an idea of what companies or housing projects pay for joining, I have our fee schedule up here. As you can see, our largest employer right now is IBM. They're in the top category there. And then it goes down from there. I believe IBM has 2,500 or more employees. But and some of the housing units that are going in Westford, I believe, are also going to be joining. Westford is a number of times has written into special permits that they should offset or mitigate their traffic that they're going to cause by joining CrossTown Connect. So it's a lever that can be used if a lot of developers are actually interested in the services, but it's also a way to get people that might not be as interested in it to put in their fair share towards transportation. And our overall focus from the beginning and moving forward is the traditional commuting, which is getting people from here to Boston and back in the evening. Also suburb to suburb commuting, which that tends to be more of the town type services, but we're getting people on their daily trips to different places. And reverse commuting, which is getting people out here, especially in this area and out towards 495. There's just a lot of growth, and we need to be able to support that without just adding more and more cars. 495 is already getting bad, and we don't want it to be as bad as 128. And then the first mile last mile connections, as I mentioned, that's our focus at the moment. We've added a lot of the services we've wanted to add, but the first mile, last mile is kind of a piece that is just starting to fall into place now. And that's pretty much, well, I guess there's one more slide I forgot about, but I'll briefly just mention, we've received a number of awards for these efforts over the past few years. We've received the Donald Wheeler from the 495 Metro West Partnership, the Community Health Network, the local Human Services Council, and we even received an award at the International City and County Managers Association, which is actually quite an honor because that's a kind of a big deal, as you all know. And we also were the first regional community compact with the governor. 5 towns at that point signed on, and they were very happy to get 5 towns on board in one fell swoop. So, thank you.
All right, let's see if I can talk. Doug and Scott, thank you very much. I have to say that this whole transit system has been very innovative, and it's been fascinating to watch it evolve over time. But questions, comments from the board? Katie?
Thank you, Doug and Scott, for the update. As you know, I no longer do, but I used to ride the commuter shuttle in Acton, and it's a huge help, and it's been incredible even in the few years that I think 4 or 5 years that I rode it, seeing just that jump in ridership. So you guys have done a great job of getting the word out there. And my question is a little bit about that in terms of some of the other services. Have you seen that the emergency ride pickup option and there was one other one, have they had, or the ride matching service, have they had an impact on increasing the number of people using those car van pool services?
Yeah, they definitely do. What's interesting about, especially with the emergency ride home, is that hardly anyone uses it.
But knowing it's there.
But knowing it's there, yeah, and it is there if you need it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a very low cost way to shift, to nudge people to do that, because like I said, it gets used a few times a year at any given company, and I don't know. And then with the ride matching, it's a little more challenging here. It works, and we definitely, that's one of our biggest things that we offer to the companies, and one of the reasons that they sign on. Mm-hmm. But it's harder to match in a suburban area as opposed to an urban area, because there are just less people doing that specific commute. But that being said, it does help to get people to take other forms of transportation. So.
Great. And then do you do surveys to kind of find out both for people going to do these ride sharing to businesses, or for using our in-town and across-town transportation services, to understand what those remaining barriers are, why some people might choose not to use them, what's holding them back?
That specific question I'm not sure about, but we do periodic surveys at both companies and the town level. The town level tends to be more on unmet needs, like what would you use this for, but you don't, or things like that. And then with companies, we're just trying to learn as much as we can about travel patterns. So we'll ask people, how often, if you carpool, and if you do, how often do you carpool, and what keeps you from carpooling, things like that. So we definitely do use surveys a lot, and you typically do them online, but we also will do paper just to try to reach as many people as we can. We'll do them on the shuttles. Sometimes we'll leave them at like a COA or something like that. Okay. So I think, to the extent that you don't want to over-survey, but
sure.
Especially at the private partners, you have to be a little more, you don't want to be sending them out too much stuff, but we like data in what we do.
Yeah, great, excellent. Well, thank you for the update.
Anybody else? Peter?
Scott, you mentioned going to Boston. Do we run a shuttle to Boston or a bus or something? Is that just to the train station or ride-sharing stuff you're promoting for this?
That was actually in a reference to getting people to the commuter rail mostly.
Okay.
We do have one company that runs a shuttle to Alewife, and it goes out to all the way to Westford. But typically what we're looking at is targeting what we have here, which is the train.
Okay, I also get confused between all these different names of the different services you offer. The Council on Aging van, that just takes people to and from the COA offices, is that what that does?
No, well, did you want to?
Yeah, we're trying to transition away from having all these names, but we do currently have 3 vans that are identified differently. The Council on Aging van its purpose is to assist seniors on their trips throughout the course of the day. So it's totally dedicated to seniors. The Roadrunner is a van that we dedicate to seniors, but if we have empty slots, we take other riders onto that. And then the Data Ride takes the general population.
Okay.
But they're not designated to certain destinations. Half of our destinations might be to the Council on Aging, half of them might be to Concord for all the medical appointments.
Okay, I've heard some concerns from Council on Aging folks about the restricted hours of some of those vans. I don't know if that's because you rotate the vans among the various services, or is there any possibility of expanding some of the hours for those vans?
We're always looking at expansion. From 1 year ago, we were averaging about 1,000 riders a month. We're up to 1,600 riders a month with those 3 vans. So it seems the more service we give, the more riders we get, the more complicated it gets for people to get a ride. So we're constantly trying to increase those hours and within the resources that we have.
Thank you.
And there's one other thing I would just like to mention to the selectmen is it's critical for us going forward to get as many partners as possible within CrossTown Connect. So one thing we would recommend to the selectmen, as you have site plans or other things in which you give approval, to consider the requirement of having them join CrossTown Connect so that we can have a more vibrant partnership that would address all the issues.
Okay, Ching Sung, Joan, any questions? Apparently not. I'll proceed. I always go last, but Doug and Scott, first back to the free ride home. You said that people actually don't use it, but I don't know if there were suddenly an uptick in demand for that. How do you pay for it? Does the paying for the carpool privilege covers, you've kind of accounted for the cost of potentially the free ride home for people who are using it?
So it's basically part of the budget. We have a programming part of the budget, and the budget is formed from dues from members, grants from the state or federal government, and our public partners as well. So we generally we've never had a problem with a big uptick in usage, but it's just a line item in the budget.
And then I had a question about the vehicles. I know you use vans, but every once in a while there's a question about accessibility, because people who need accessible vehicles have all kinds of needs, and I don't know if these vehicles have the capacity to pick up somebody who can't go out of the wheelchair, has to stay in it. And then the second question, which just popped into my mind, is there a size, a capacity that's sort of optimal for transit in the suburbs, based on cost of the vehicles and how many people they carry? I mean, obviously at some point you don't want to have, say, a big city bus, because even if you could fill it every time, well, I assume they're terribly expensive, plus they're not as sort of flexible perhaps, but is there, those are two different questions, but both relating to the vans, but.
Sure, yeah. So all of our vans are accessible. They all have lifts except for the rail shuttle. The rail shuttle is a bigger vehicle, but all of the other ones, I think we're up to 10 or something like that now between all the towns, and they all have ADA, they're all ADA accessible and have lifts on them. As far as the optimal size, we typically use about a 14, 15 passenger van. That is a good size because a lot of the things that we do are like, we'll do special trips on like a certain day with a certain vehicle, and the community that uses that knows that like this day we will go to go shopping in Littleton or something like that. So we tend to fill them on those trips. We have thrown around the idea of trying out smaller vehicles for some other purposes, but going much smaller than that would really kind of limit our special trip capacity.
And I know when I go to Alewife, I see all kinds of vans. I assume maybe they're private employer vans, but just all these vans of a certain size. They're probably like 14 or 10 people all heading for Alewife. And of course, there I am on my little single person car, but anyhow, because I don't work for a place where I could get a van. But I'm wondering if there have been people who have been modeling or entities or communities modeling after what you've done here with public-private partnerships in other parts of the state, or are you going to expand eventually to have a network that covers the entire eastern Massachusetts? Or
we're not bent on world domination. I think there might be one or two towns that would make sense. That maybe Stowe or Carlisle or something like that. But I think we're getting to where we want to be for size.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of those shuttles that you see coming from Alewife are private shuttles. Actually, the company I work for has another arm that does corporate shuttles, and a lot of those are probably transaction shuttles that you see over at Alewife. But yeah, some of them are real estate developers, some of them are biotech companies. They're just they kind of run the gamut for the big developers and companies.
It just makes so much sense. Whoever's paying for it and whoever's on it, it just makes sense to do that. And I guess we're going to need more of it. I think that's it for questions for me. So I don't know if anybody has any. So let me see if are there any audience members who have questions for Doug and Scott?
Good evening, Danny Factor, 11 Davis Road. May I ask the chair permission to ask a question to Doug?
You can ask a question of either. That's why you're up there, Danny. Go ahead.
Good to see you both. Doug and Scott, I'm so impressed as both a member of the Commission on Disabilities and also a member of the Board of Directors of Green Act, and this has just been a wonderful transformation in the town to make it more accessible and more green, and it's just incredible to see the network grow and all the people who are affected. I did have a specific question. It had to do with a neighbor of mine, and Doug, I think you're aware of it. I won't mention his name. He's asked me not to mention it, but he lives right near me. And he had a situation where he wrote you, and you wrote a very prompt and courteous response, and you'll probably be familiar with it, but he had a situation where he had a doctor's appointment on Baker Avenue, and he called CrossTown Connect more than a week in advance and found out that, well, on that day, the van had to go to the food pantry and was not able to accommodate him. So he called, rescheduled his appointment. Took a while to get the rescheduled date, but when he did, he called back. And again, the rescheduled date, also, it was not able to accommodate him. So now he's done it a third time, but the appointment is going to be almost 3 months later than it would have been. And, I was very impressed, by your reply in that it was courteous and frank. And it did hint at, the issue that yeah, we sometimes are at capacity, and that there is the contemplation of getting another van. So I just wanted to ask, and it's, along the lines, I think, of what Peter was asking also, more specifically, what, obviously the town wants people to make it to their doctor's appointments. That's the priority. We don't want delay in that kind of situation. Is there specific help that you need, from us, from the town? Is there a plan to get that additional van soon?
Thank you, Danny. We do have the van. We've been working with Lowell Regional Transit Authority for them to give us an additional van at $1 per year, and they have delivered that van. We are now in the process of implementing the use of that van. There are two aspects that we want to cover. One is to create a better commuting process for the trains in the morning and the evening, and also to have additional door-to-door service within the normal part of the day. We're hoping that implementation will occur within the next month, and that process will provide more openings for people to schedule. But I've been doing this for 4 years, and it seems like no matter how many vans we put out there, we quickly reach capacity. And part of that growing pains is that some people don't always get the ride that they need. And I would just encourage people, if anything goes wrong or if they feel they can't get a ride, to contact me, because if I don't know about these things, I can't correct them or address them.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sarah Coletti, Willow Street in Acton. I wanted to ask if you had done any needs assessment or survey concerning getting employees to their retail shifts work, which would mean sort of evening hours. And the second thing is helping students get to Middlesex Community College.
We are aware of those needs. We had a grant process 5 months ago in which I went to CrossTown Connect partners, and I suggested that one of the grants we applied for would be to have a connection to Bedford. The communities felt that we were not in the position to implement that yet, so they've asked us to delay requesting for a grant for that to next year. So in the same thing with employees getting to their workplace, especially in the evenings, it's a matter of resources. We have enough resources right now to virtually cover from 6 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night for different types of service. But getting beyond that, that would have to be a greater commitment from the community to achieve that.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Sullivan, 170 Split Rock, and I have a question for Scott, if I could, Madam Chairman. The Insulet building, the big, huge building that is going on in Nagog Park, I don't know whether you can speak to conversations with specific companies, but I live in Nagog Woods. I voted against that development for a whole variety of reasons, including the fact that I think it's going to create far too much traffic. So if you are in conversations with them, I applaud that, and if you are not, I would urge you to do that.
I can just speak to that briefly, but I did have a meeting with a person over at Insulet. I'm not sure what they're going to decide, but I did have an introductory meeting and told them about the programs and encouraged them to join. I do know that I think there's supposed to be close to 1,000 people there. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So if there's over 1,000, that will trigger the rideshare regulation, which might nudge them to join, because that's just a thought. But the conversation I had was very nice, and I'm going to follow up with him if I don't hear from him. But definitely want to get them on board with it, because they're definitely going to be the biggest.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I would obviously urge, whoever the appropriate town authorities are to contact them and urge them to become involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Martin. I live on High Street. Just very quickly, how does one find out about new services, like if you were to inaugurate a service to Boxborough or IBM or something? I usually email you, but how does one find out about the services? Do you advertise them somewhere?
We do. We have a variety of different mechanisms that we advertise. A lot of it is direct mailings when we know for particular areas there will be a stop there. For instance, with our CAT, we have residential complexes. We send a flyer to every one of those units. We use other mechanisms like the web or using our own website, crosstownconnect.org, to try to get the information out. But I would say that we're always challenged on that, because it's hard to identify the people who might be interested and the manner in which we connect with them. We're always challenged by that.
Yeah, we also, we have an online presence, and we'll also, when we start a new service, we try to get out into the community with flyers and posters and things like that as well. But
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, gentlemen, well, thank you very, very much for a really great presentation, and keep up the good work. And don't retire, Doug. Okay, next item on the agenda is the CPA project application prioritization.
Chair, it's really not prioritization, it's submission to the CPC.
Okay, okay.
We'll do that later, like in February.
Okay, yeah, okay, so this is just for us to decide whether we are willing to have all these applications go forward. So we got a slew of applications. Lisa thoughtfully reduced the amount of paper, number of trees we were going to kill by just including the application forms themselves. They're in your packet, but I don't know what the best way is to go through these. I don't know if people want to talk about which ones they definitely want to move forward, which ones they think ought not to move forward. Maybe we could start that way to try to reduce the amount of discussion or whatever. Yep.
I had questions on a couple of them, and I see some of the town staff that are here that did them, so that would be helpful. But the first one was about the RHSO, so that's for funding 2 years of membership. And I think we did that last time, but was that not last year? It was 2 years ago? Okay. For 2 years, okay, but so we didn't have the application last year for, okay.
I actually think, excuse me, but the CPC reduced a couple of those years to a 1 year. So,
okay.
Because we needed the money for other projects.
For other things.
I don't know how.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, because I couldn't remember if we'd seen it. It's familiar, but it also always.
Well, early on, I think that CPC wanted to test it. I mean, they said, let's do it for 1 year, and maybe ultimately, I think they were thinking the town could put it into the operating budget, but I think it keeps coming up, and nobody seems to object. I think because it's demonstrated that it's a very valuable service and well worth the cost, so.
Right.
All right. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
no, I'm
Katie.
very supportive of that. I just want to make sure. I was just confusing myself. 53 River Street, my only question on this was that I had a question about whether or not, I understand the dam, doing the study on the dam removal and stuff, but there was talk in there about looking specifically at, adding parks and those things, and we haven't, the master planning committee isn't underway yet, so I just wanted to make sure we weren't sort of predetermining what the use of that land would be. So I'm wondering if somebody, maybe, I think Bettina, this might have been yours, or Tom or somebody, if you wouldn't mind just talking about that really quickly, just to clarify that this isn't making a predetermination about what the use of that property would be.
Madam Chair. Exactly. It's just one of the components of their services that they would be working directly with the 53 River Street Study Committee. And so the 53 River Street Study Committee would probably go through their a la carte services that they have here, and they would come to a determination about what they would like to buy and have them do. And the parks that the park designs that Ty and Bond would put forward so far have been based on the presentation at town meeting that, the town said they wanted to do with the property, but also, sort of what the open space and recreation people thought would be a good use of the parcel. But they would be working with this committee to come up with designs. They wouldn't do it for them or, yeah.
No, I think that's great, and I think it's great to have upfront that already built-in support for the committee, because I know with the Main Street Master Plan, we had to kind of go out and seek out that support later on, so I think that's good to have that upfront. This question is probably for Bill Clower about the Kennedy building. So there's the gates, which I get, and then my only question was about the actual building, the building itself that would have the rehab. I know that the building is, part of the area forum and all of that, but I was just wondering if you could talk about the historic nature of that building, and so just to make sure this qualifies as historic preservation for the specific building.
Sure. When we did the 3 cemeteries a number of years ago, the Historical Commission, we did an area, what we call an area plan. So rather than nominate everything that's in there, hundreds of headstones and different types of things that are found in a cemetery, they were written up to just include everything that was in there. Now, under the auspices of the Massachusetts Historical Commission, the local Historical Commission has the ability to do individual nominations for any building that is 50 years older. And actually, we can do less than that if there's something that we really think is particularly credible about this building and recognizable. As far as the Kennedy building is concerned, the reason that we're really, as a cemetery commissioner, the reason that we're really after this is the fact we don't have anything in our cemeteries that is handicapped accessible. And we have people come in there all the time. This is only one cemetery. West Acton has absolutely no facilities whatsoever. Mount Hope has the majority of the activity in it at the current time, but we know that we need to move forward with this building. And like I said, it is 50 years old at this point in time. It's the only building that's in there. If people are coming in for any sort of service, they have to try and get up the stairs. But we had started this project and just found out that it was, in the grand scheme of everything going on in the cemetery and a much larger scheme of the town, there just wasn't enough resources out there that we could move forward with the thing. So we have a ramp too that has been put in. We have a handicapped accessible doorway, but we need to go the one extra step, go in through the building. If you go in that room, I think Mrs. Garden is aware of the condition of it. It looks exactly as it did in 1966. It is paint over cement blocks, and we'd like to have something a little bit more presentable. If you look at the way our culture is changing, we do not do large funerals anymore. There is a lot of graveside services. People are keeping things down to a minimum, but by the same token, they have to have when they're in the cemetery, we have to have something that we can work with.
No, I think that's great. Okay, thank you. And then I'll keep you up here for 1 second. This might be a question to you / the town manager about the North Acton School project. So purchasing that building, which first of all, I think is a great solution to that, because I know the owner had kind of wanted to preserve it, but was having a hard time doing that. And so I think this is going to be a wonderful solution. But I just wanted you to speak a little bit about, you know, potential future uses for that site and or that building, if we've put much thought into that.
May I?
Either one.
Dare I? It's sort of an interesting thing at this point in time, because the first thing is, can we actually acquire this piece of property? It's unique. I sat here a few months back when we were going to talk about the possibility of putting a new fire station up in that area. And I tend to think that we don't know that much about the piece of land that the Fish and Game buildings are on, and we don't have a design or anything. I mean, if we bought this, I could see some flexibility to what goes on with the other piece of property. There are things we just do not know about it yet, and it's not my problem, but I mean, it would be yours if you decide that that the property doesn't have the right configuration and everything to it. As far as reuse of this building, I don't know. You know, built in 1839, it served as a school until 1873. So there's always a possibility that you could do a one-room schoolhouse similar to what Boxborough has and the one over at Henry Ford's Village over in Sudbury. As far as we are concerned, how often would we use it? I don't know. But could we find other uses for it? That I think we could. It has been a house, a private residence for probably 120 years or so, maybe 140 years at this point in time now, but I don't know what it would take to put it back as something that's habitable enough that you could rent it out.
I don't think, based on a discussion I think Selby had before he went out on his surgery, is that it'd be really hard to make it housing anymore. I mean, the bedroom upstairs is not accessible really. I think we'd have to think about it, kind of like Jones Tavern or something like that, where it's kind of recreated and maybe it's open a few days a year for folks to see or something like that.
I think the main purpose is to save it, and I think that's a really important purpose. It's our only one, so I think it's really good. Okay, thank you. And then I had just 2 quick questions for recreation. So the sign, the message sign, is that just like the ones you see with the orange letters that we see in town for other, flu clinic and, whatever that's outside the police station or sometimes at the corner by the ball fields and stuff like that? Is that same kind of sign, or is this a permanent sign? Like in a one permanent location sign?
This would be exactly like the highway message boards that are currently out on the street.
Okay, and is there a reason we're looking for CPA funding for that as opposed to using town funding or just that CPA funding is not town funding to do that? Because it does seem like we bought the other ones presumably with town funding. It's more. Okay. And then my other question was just about the skate bowl, because I know you guys have been trying to get this remaining part of the funding for the last phase of the skate bowl for a long time, or the skate park. And part of this is Boxborough going back to their CPA now that they have it for $20,000. Do you have a sense of the likelihood of whether or not that will pass? And if it fails again, are there other plans to raise that money, and particularly from the Boxborough Recreation Commission, do they have plans for that? Because it seems so far it's pretty much been primarily Acton funding the skate park.
Yes, that is correct. They're meeting this next 2 weeks. I hope to attend with them, but they're looking to put the $20,000 in as, I think, a general article.
Oh, okay.
For their next town meeting.
Okay.
they have to nail down all the details and get approvals to move forward on that, which they will do at their next meeting.
Okay.
From our part, we're looking to do some fundraising. We spent the last year or so looking at the possibility of crowdfunding as a means. We did try to get a grant. Unfortunately, we weren't eligible, but we may be able to proceed with a crowdfunding effort to put up some of that money.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think those are all my questions, and I just say I know it's a lot of applications that the town would be putting forward, but I do think each in their own right is worth the CPA considering. And, you know, when they come back to us and we know what the other applications are, we can think more about prioritizing them, but none jumped out at me as ones that we shouldn't put forward this year. I think they're all worthwhile applications.
Okay, thank you. Joan, you?
What's the total amount of money that we, no, I've got that, but what's the total amount of money available?
I don't think we have a calculation yet, but over the past few years, it's been close to $1 million in both town funds and state funds available. We also have certain set-asides, open space set-aside that has money put aside historic. There's a historic set-aside of money that we haven't been able to fund the minimum requirement for historic structures in the past, so we put that money aside. So it's near $1 million is my memory.
But these won't be the only applications.
Yeah, there'll be other
we'll receive.
applications.
Right, ones that aren't town ones.
Yeah, most of these, except for a couple, don't add up to very much anyway. Anybody else? Joan, are you done? Peter?
Yeah, I just wanted to I don't have any problem with moving any of these forward. I wanted to kind of echo Katie's comment about 53 River Street. I have a couple of questions, which I'm sure will come up through the CPA process, but one is, it does seem like this is a pretty specific RFP that determines what is going to happen on a piece of property. So I have the same questions that Katie does about how the 53 River Street Committee is going to fit in here. We have to work through some issues before that committee gets up and running. Hopefully, there'll be meeting before the town meeting comes up and the CPA votes, CPC votes on these projects, and we can work those through. The other question I have about it is for the Main Street Master Plan, we use town funds to pay for the consultant, and I don't know particularly why this would be treated differently. The property itself was acquired with town funds. There's always concerns at the CPC, I think, about whether CPA funds are appropriate versus town money for certain projects. So that's another question that I'm sure we'll have to work through. But it is possible that the committee could come up with some creative idea that nobody has mentioned yet. I agree that this is the concept that the town purchased the property for, but that's the purpose of the committee, is to come up with a recommendation about how to use it. And it's possible there might be some uses that would not be eligible for CPA or CPA funding. So those are the questions I have about it. I don't have a problem with moving it forward, but I'm sure we'll have to struggle with those as the CPC considers these. Thank you.
Jinx-on? Anything? Kathy, since you're so close to the microphone, the message board, I sort of thought that sounds like something that should come out of operating, but I don't feel real strongly one way or the other. I had a question about the stage ramp. I guess you're talking about the thing that's on top of the stage, that you have stairs that lead up to it and it's not accessible. And I was looking at the illustrations on the material that you submitted with the application, and I thought the ramp to make that stage accessible looked as if it might take up a good lot of the space on the concrete platform or whatever it is where it's sitting. I didn't know if it would end up being an obstacle for people who are able-bodied to get around, but or if it's an adjustable size, or if there's something that's available that isn't so large.
It should work within the configuration we have. They're 8x4 wide portable units that we put together. We don't have a complete rectangle. It's somewhat short, several pieces, and that's where the ramp would come in. So it would fit within the configuration that we have.
And so if it's portable, you mean you would take it down, or you would leave it up permanently?
Yeah, all
or-
of the staging units we have are portable units that we fold up and put away when they're not in use.
Okay. And I think those are the only questions I had about RAC. So you're off the hook.
Thank you.
All these other, I mean, RHSL, I was fine with that. 53 River, I actually, I'm not too concerned about that. I didn't even think about whether it was sort of predicting what the purpose was going to be. I mean, I figured that this was just sort of based on the town meeting presentation where I was, and I forgot I'd presented, but people were telling me that these were the purposes that they had in mind as far as buying the thing was concerned. So that's what I represented to the public were among the things that we were going to be looking at. But I think that having consulting services makes sense for the reasons that are really listed in great detail in that proposal. I had the same question about the building associated with Woodlawn Cemetery. I understood that Woodlawn itself was historical, but I didn't know if the Kennedy building at 50 years qualified for being historical. And of course, one day I'd like some people to explain to me when a building actually qualifies as historical, because there are some houses, like ranch houses, that everybody hates, which probably are at least 50 years old, but they would never want to bother spending town money to preserve them as significant. But there are architects and other people who think that that's a significant part of our nation's history, the proliferation of ranch homes, one of which I grew up in. Anyhow, Camp Acton, the Arboreta Chime, those both have what CPC would call lots of leverage. They're not looking just to the town or for CPA money to provide all the funding, which is good. Library etchings, I would love to see those restored. I didn't know that there was something called foxing, which are the brown spots, because I've had artwork in my family, it's got little brown spots, now I know what it's called, and that there's a way to actually clean it up. Skate park, it would be great to finish that and be able to move on. And of course, open space set aside, I'm fine with that. So I'm basically fine with moving all of them forward and letting CPC ask the hard questions and come back to us.
So do you need a motion?
Yeah, I think we need to.
So I'll make a motion to move all of the town applications forward to the CPA.
Second.
Katie moves and Joan seconds. Are there any comments, questions from the audience? Okay, any further discussion on the board? Okay, Dave.
On David Hahn, 105 School Street. On 53 River, I just want to remind you that in terms of the uses, that's an Historic District Commission property, so anything anybody comes up with, as long as it's 1 foot or more above grade, the HDC has to give the okay or not okay. So, there's an connection there between whatever committee, 53 River Committee, and the HDC.
Thank you for that reminder. Anybody else? All right, we have a motion and second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstaining. Thank you all. Town staff, everybody can go home. All right, next item is Board of Selectmen Immigration Policy. Katie, you've been driving the charge on this.
Sure. So as everybody knows, a couple of meetings ago, we looked at a proposed immigration policy that would be complementary to the police's newly enacted policy. And after that, we sent it to town council, who made some proposed edits. We took those back and made some additional edits. So the current proposed policy is in the packet, as well as a version that's redlined, so you can see the changes since what we last discussed. I will note that there's a concern about Section 3 in the added language in there, particularly around that that this wouldn't, unless the section that says unless the laws or regulations of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or the bylaws or regulations of the town of Acton require municipal employees to do so. There's particular concern around the word regulation, so I think you'll hear from some folks tonight about why they're concerned with that, and some potential proposed alterations, so we can talk about those, but otherwise it hasn't changed much in since our last discussion, and so I think we're hoping to move forward with a vote ideally tonight on this, as I think it's important to get this enacted. So I think it'd be helpful to hear from some of the audience members about that one issue.
Okay, what about first board members? Any comments? Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I just point out that there are lots of instances where law requires that you inquire about status of citizen, of residents, any employee the town hires. We have to verify their immigration status. I mean, so there are lots of instances where it's required. I agree that regulations is probably not appropriate to have in that sentence. This allows the town, as I understand it, to respond to a judicial judge-issued subpoena or a warrant for to detain an illegal resident who has been identified through an arrest and information that comes from the federal government. It may put in jeopardy some town funds. I understand the federal government gives the town money for protective vests for police officers under federal grants. Those have been threatened by the current administration, but with those comments, I'm fully in favor of this. One question I have is we now have things like I had pointed out earlier on the VCC application. Asks, are you a citizen? Are you a legal resident? If this gets adopted, do we automatically, that gives us the ability to just strike that from the application?
I should add, and I apologize I didn't do this earlier, that I also talked to Laura Ducharme about this as well, because she does assist, she's our community services coordinator, and she does assist people in filling out applications for state benefits, and sometimes actually with immigration support. So she does sometimes inquire about, but she does not collect that information. If she helps submit anything, she gives an original copy back to the resident and then destroys any other copies or anything like that. So the primary idea is that we're not documenting or keeping any immigration information on somebody's immigration status, because that prevents if the federal government asks us for any information, we do not have any information to give, because under federal law, we're not allowed to prohibit or limit exchanging or receiving that kind of information, so we just will not collect it in the first place. So that's the main purpose of it. And yes, I mean, I think that would be one of the changes would be to remove that from our VCC form. So I think that would be important. And as far as town council had said to me she doesn't know of any state laws that require, I think, that directly require keeping that kind of information, so she didn't see any concerns with that. But yeah, again, the word regulation is a big one, so if people are comfortable removing that, I think that would be, would get to a very good point where everybody would be supportive of this, but we can talk about that and hear what the concerns are.
But wasn't council the one who put that language in?
She put some version of it in, and then I had changed it, and then, yeah, and again, I think her main concern was just making sure that our staff could continue to do what they are required to.
Tara, we're going to continue discussion here first.
To do what they're what they do. So mainly for things like, for somebody like Laura to help filling out those kinds of applications and things like that. But I think she still would be able to do that under the revised language if we moved regulation. I think she would still be able to perform her duties, which is the main concern, and all of our town staff would. And again, I mean, the police department's separate policy does not mention that, so it's, you know, doesn't affect them.
Do they mention mass laws and local laws, bylaws? Or?
I don't have it in front of me. I mean,
I assume it's the concern about regulations that it's not the legislature.
Right.
Locally or, okay.
Right, and then
It's
it could just
an
be
agency.
changed. Right, exactly, and there's not a lot of public input, and then it could lead to some regulation coming out that would, that we would then have to follow, that would be in violation of sort of the purpose of this, so.
Okay. Any further comments on the board? Jing-Sung, Joan? No? Okay. Audience.
I'm going to let my colleagues speak to the motion, but I did want a point of information that Brookline doesn't have the word regulations in. They have a whole department full of social workers that are helping people with forms and whatnot, and their town lawyer and municipal lawyer was fine with that. Thank you.
Good evening. Paul Garber, 266 High Street. First of all, thanks so much for working on this. I mean, I think it's been great work, and as we saw in the previous session. I want to just speak a little bit to the question of regulation, because I think we're very close to a resolution on this. I just want to make it clear why we're concerned about the word regulations. The first comment I'd make is the latter part of that refers to possible new bylaws or regulations passed by the municipality. Now, I'm not sure that's necessary, because if you do pass new bylaws or regulations that would override this policy, you would effectively rescind it. So I don't know what kind of a policy says, well, unless we change it in the future. I think you don't need to do that because you have the power to change it. But that's not very important. I think what is important is the threat to the police policy, potential threat, because we looked at that very carefully with respect to the various regulations of the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration, discussed that thoroughly with the police, and the police felt very strongly that they would be best served by a very simple policy that would simply not refer to anything, but simply say they also will follow the law if that's needed. So I would be a little concerned that we would inadvertently, by putting this in the town policy, open up the potential for overriding a very carefully balanced police policy. You know, Governor Baker occasionally makes noises about changes he'd like to see. One interpretation of regulation could be an executive order. We don't know whether that would be constitutional, but I think that would be a problem, that we should not open the doorway for that. I think generally regulations is a pretty broad and ambiguous category. I don't know what state agencies might have any interest in asking for the collection, requiring town employees to collect information on immigration status. There are none now, clearly, because of the Lund decision. How would we know if such regulations that might be proposed by some agency would be constitutional or even lawful? And why would the responsible government, the town of Acton, defer to regulations that were not vetted and could arise from various sources? I also agree very much with what was said about the case of the social worker or community services person that assists filling out forms. As long as no record is kept, which would trigger the requirement of the town to share that information with the Department of Homeland Security, there's certainly no problem in any town employee assisting some person in the community with filling out a form. The The problem would only be triggered if a permanent record were kept of that. And I think that that's a satisfactory solution. So I'm not quite sure what problem we're addressing by putting in the word regulation. Because the only possible regulations that could go in were things that don't now exist and could only cause harm to this policy. Finally, I would just say that the objective of this is to make it clear for town employees what they are expected of them. They don't need a broad area of ambiguity that would make them make decisions, nor would they want to open up the town to possible litigation. This is why I think reference to law is sufficient, that the reference to regulations solves no problem and can only create potential mischief in the future. Thanks. But thank you for your very hard work on this.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments from the audience? Peter, you have something to say?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to respond to that briefly. I mean, to me, adhering to a legitimately, lawfully issued regulation is a question of the rule of law. If you disagree with the regulation, you go to court to try to get it stopped. You just don't refuse to obey it. You know, the word regulation as it relates to the town really doesn't have any meaning to me. I mean, our regulations, the planning board has regulations, rules are regulations. They're not legally enforceable, kind of, but I think the second paragraph really says, you know, we won't violate any laws, so you could really take out the language in paragraph 3 that talks about unless the laws or regulations of the Commonwealth, because I think it's covered by paragraph 2 anyway, so that's my thoughts.
Danny Factor, 11 Davis Road. I want to applaud what Paul said. I'm going to keep my remarks fairly brief because of that, because I think he really zeroed in on the concern of our group, which very much applauds, you know, I think almost every suggestion that was made by town council we're completely fine with. But the major concern is preserving that wonderful police policy. And you know, understanding that, yes, there is a way for the state ultimately to override that, but Acton or no town should be opening the door or, you know, inviting that in any way. I do want to say, you know, remind us of the broader context that, I mean, we're dealing with a situation where the civil liberties of our people who live and work in and even visit Acton is really under attack. An administrative agency of the government, ICE, with absolutely no adjudicatory authority, has gotten it into its mind that it can actually detain and apprehend those in Acton and actually, you know, use Acton employees to do so. And there are actual narratives of detentions of law-abiding residents in our region, which have been documented by our own state senator, Jamie Eldridge. So this is reality, it's not hypothetical. So in response, you know, and to protect the basic civil liberties of our people, you know, we've made a decision in the wording to hopefully leverage our responsibility as a town, just like we do when we say negotiate with a union, or when, you know, the Board of Selectmen takes any position of something that it wants to accomplish. We leverage our language to make it, you know, as tight as possible, and to make sure that we're maximizing the possibility of this being overriding. And the position of our group, and we've had 2 meetings this week, and it's been unanimous by consensus, is that opening up the door to putting in that word is threatening the existence of our police policy. That it's just inviting the state that has, you know, made overtures towards wanting to do that, to make it easier for them to do it. And what Tara says is absolutely correct, that the word regulation did not exist in the Brookline language, and there's been no peep from the Attorney General about that. There's been no lawsuit against the town. It seems like there's only a downside to leaving it in and only an upside to taking it out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would just add, I would echo what Peter said about certainly regulations at the state level. They go through an administrative process, and they are, laws and regulations have the force of law if they're properly adopted. And as he said, at the local level, what we call regulations don't necessarily go through the same process. But I would actually want to keep paragraph 3 in. I'm fine with deleting regulations as long as people understand that where you're talking about the force of law, regulations, certainly at the state level, would be considered by a lot of people to have the force of law, whether or not you refer to them specifically. So,
Tara Fredericks, West Acton. I spent a goodly part of the last week researching how binding regulations are to towns, and I was very interested to find that they aren't automatically binding by law unless they're binding by law. So just because an agency declares something and goes through the administrative process also doesn't automatically mean that they're binding. A town can challenge them, and then if they win, they aren't binding. But the process is what I'm mostly concerned about, because the state agencies, all they have to do is effectively file on this website that says that they are initiating a regulation or they're looking for comment. And effectively going through the comment period, they can suddenly then just ignore all the comments and implement the regulation. And if towns aren't in a position to challenge, they then will find themselves effectively, voluntarily bound by this regulation because they're afraid to challenge it. But effectively, the only way that it can be binding is if there's a specific law that has been passed by the legislature that has denied the town the right to do something or to deny something. And until that takes place, then that regulation isn't necessarily binding unless, in fact, it is carrying out a law that took the right away from the town to challenge such. And so the idea of a regulation going through that administrative process, there's very little oversight to it. Yes, the towns get to comment and they're given officially a chance to do so, but when it's gone through the legislature, that means all of the legislature, all of the representatives and senators around the state get to comment, and they're notified, and there are hearings, and there's much more oversight by the public. So I feel like laws is fine, but regulations should be taken out for the reasons already stated. Relative to a point of information that Paul said, he wasn't sure that agencies have a reason to collect the information. Right now they don't, but there's a distinct profit motive because several agencies are actually gathering information and selling it. And Baker has since taken down several websites where we were getting information for free on environmental aspects of development and whatnot, and now people have to pay for that. You can subscribe to the regulation page that tells you that a regulation is being proposed for change, and it'll cost you about $300 a year to subscribe, just to get an email from them. Okay, so there's a distinct profit motive by these government agencies to collect this information. So I hope you take out regulations, and I'm okay with with the rest of the wording. Thank you. But I like the Peter's idea to take out that whole paragraph because I think it makes it ambiguous. Thank you.
Hi, Fang Yang, 11 Farmstead Way, Acton. I appreciate Peter and Jenny's idea towards removing the regulation. I totally agree with you. What I want to say is just read the police policy, which regarding about the laws. You were asking, right? The police policy.
Janet asked if it referred to regulations at all in the police policy.
Exactly. I want to read that paragraph. All persons coming into contact with police officers or other personnel of the department shall be afforded all of the civil and human rights and due process and equal protection safeguards available under the Constitution and the laws of the United States, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the Town of Acton, and the treaties of the United States as applicable, irrespective of their immigration status. That's what it is. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. I think I've gotten the idea that consistency with the police department policy means that we should eliminate the word regulations. As I said, though, it may not be completely eliminated even if you don't specify it, but I think we have some guidance. Now, there's been some chatter about eliminating paragraph 3 altogether. I would not agree to that, so if you want to talk about it.
No, I'm comfortable just removing the 2 mentions of regulation in paragraph 3. And again, as Janet said, and Peter, it doesn't necessarily mean if there is a regulation that comes out, I think the town might have to sue if we think it's not just or it violates our policy, but that, remains to be seen. I don't think that changes with removing this. So I would make a motion to approve the Acton Board of Selectmen immigration policy as proposed with the removal of the 2 references to or regulations in section 3.
Second.
Katie moves and John seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstaining. And thank you, Katie, and everybody in the audience for working so hard on this, both actually on the police department, memorializing that and then getting this policy done. So
thank you. I want to thank the board and everybody who's helped on this. I think it's really important. And I also want to just give another shout out and thanks to the police department. They've since adopting their policy been trying to spread the word about it, going to different events and things to make sure people know about it. And I think we should work on doing the same with our immigration policy as well. And just note that, our work doesn't stop here, but I just want to thank everybody for their support on this. I think it's really important.
And you're back on because next we're talking about sustainability policy.
This was a night for me. Okay. So the Town of Acton sustainability policy, so as everybody remembers, even further back than when we were talking immigration policy, we were talking sustainability policy. And that the idea of sustainability is our #1 short-term goal this year. So what we had sort of agreed to as a process and what's happened is that Green Acton through Deborah Symes and Jim Snyder Grant put together the draft sustainability policy that we then sent out as a first step to all boards and committees in town and asked for input from them on that. And the idea is that we'll take this input, have a discussion tonight, and then hopefully make some further changes and then put that back out to the broader public for discussion and comment from individuals. So to date, I had received comments that are in your packet from Green Acton, the Design Review Board, the Acton Boxborough Regional School Committee, the Acton Community Housing Corporation, and then just summaries of conversations I had with the Historical Commission and the Finance Committee. So I think, and I'd like to hear what other people, comments are and reactions from other board members. I think to me it seemed like one of the big questions coming out of the comments was about how broad we want to make this policy and how we're defining sustainability. And is this a focus really on environmental sustainability, or is it a little bit larger? Particularly, I think those would get to the comments from Historical and Acton Community Housing Corporation and maybe Design Review Board. Personally, I think when we broaden it too much, it gets a little bit more into things that are more like our master plans, like the Acton 2020, which deals a lot more with these interactions, and not to say that there aren't housing or historical or other concerns related to sustainability, and I think those are part of this. I think for me, I think it would make sense to have a more focused policy on environmental sustainability. But I would like to just have a conversation with the board and get an understanding of what direction or comments that you kind of liked or disliked or things like that to kind of help guide us in getting to a next version of this.
Anybody? Peter? Somebody?
My only comments are that we might want to beef up the prologue, particularly I think the ACHC's comments about development. Certainly smart growth is a green initiative in town. The Flex Code is a green initiative. I mentioned the carbon neutrality that the Green Advisory Board is moving forward on with 40 grand that we were able to access from the restricted monies that go into the account from the solar array at the transfer station. mention the new award that Steve just mentioned in his comments today, where we've lowered our energy consumption over 20% in the last, however many years. So, I mean, my main comment was I think we should beef up some of the discussion of development being green, which, is, to me, a big environmental piece, so.
Joe? Ching-Song? Anything?
Joe?
Are you
I don't like the word every at the beginning of this policy.
Where?
The literal first word of the policy is every official action of the town of Acton. I really don't like the word every. I think that is too binding. I think that wording it such that to not include that word would be better. It's a nitpick, basically.
You're very nitpicky.
I also don't necessarily think annual reports are necessary, but I have no objections overall to annual reports. So, if, the board feels strongly about that, then that's fine. But overall, I guess my concern, I also have a concern with 4A, financial analysis of capital intensive projects that compares the long-term costs of taking action versus those of failing to take action. While I think that's good in general to do this kind of analysis, at least in my experience, examination of long-term costs of failing to take action is, I've seen enough varying analysis on those that I question the accuracy of a lot of those analyses. And so therefore, using that as a primary basis for decision, I'm not confident that I like. Obviously, but all the rest of the stuff in general, I think the policy is good, and the general direction of the policy is obviously something that I think we should continue to move forward towards.
Joe? Oh, you can't. Oh, you have the same. Oh gosh, it's contagious. Would you like
a lot of people without a voice tonight.
would you like a cough drop? You're okay. All right. Yeah. Well, maybe I'm turning the corner. Yeah. No. Well, I got it either from my husband 2 weeks ago or from my 96-year-old mother, but neither of them got laryngitis, and they would probably say there's a reason that I got it. It's punishment for talking too much, but I obviously am supportive of the general notion of sustainability. I do think for people, one of the things I met with Deborah and Jim before the FinCom meeting to go over what they were going to say to FinCom, and I think maybe I just emphasized too much finance and maybe spoiled the fun they were having in presenting to FinCom. But I think that I know that I'm at heart a very pragmatic person. And so one of the things I was thinking as I was reading through this is, okay, so where's the concrete stuff where you actually figure out what you're supposed to do? Because this, I think the prologue, just a matter of presentation, this is a pick, but I would like to see a bullet list or something that's easier to read, because then it just jumps out at you. All the stuff that we've done, including the stuff that Peter suggested, because I'm not a lazy reader, but I cater to people who are lazy, including in my own family, because I know that, there are bullet point lists exist for a reason, because people will actually pay attention. And I know from having written paragraphs that are one sentence, one paragraph long, myself, that people don't like that. So, and they are likely to get lost. But I just thought that that it would be helpful. I still am sort of struggling with the idea of making it focused heavily on environmental, unless if you can bring in all the other concerns. I don't want to make it into this broad, like, master plan number 2 or something like that, but I kind of think that at heart, I mean, it's really environmental. The reason for it's the concern with sustainability is environmental, and if you can explain that so that all of these activities that towns have to engage in abide by, you know, the fundamentals about environmental sustainability, then it would be helpful. But I think, yeah, I think that people have talked about, well, FinCom has obviously talked about financial sustainability, and that is part of it. You know, you don't want to use resources you don't have, and that also includes money. You don't want to waste resources, that includes money. But, you know, and when you're talking about a town-wide policy, it can make a big difference. It has made a big difference in our town on the bottom line because we've adopted certain practices that are at heart environmentally inspired, but people might not necessarily see it that way. I think my concern is people will say, okay, we want to be green, but there are people out there who will say this is one of those crunchy granola, warm and fuzzy things, and it's not what we do because we're business people. But they need, anybody who's gone to the transfer station and does pay as you throw, which I know has another name that I can never remember, can see, practically speaking, how being environmentally sensitive actually is good for the bottom line. And I'm not saying that people in this town are all bullheaded and don't understand that being environmentally friendly and sensible is good for a lot of other things besides the environment. But I think it would be helpful in the interest of being more inclusive, given that all these people have weighed in on it, to figure out a way to incorporate all of the things that they're concerned about. The other thing, something else that I would mention, Ching Sung said he didn't think that there had to be an annual report, but I was at DRB, and I'm gonna, Dave, I have a very good memory, and I remember you talked about having some sort of an annual event or something. You know, I think that it's important, one, for us to be able to measure. Are we, aside from just having a chit chat about, well, what have we done and all that, it would be nice to have some sort of a thing, an event where people, I don't know, just have fun and go to booths or something and hear about environmentally important issues, sustainable sort of issues, and get excited about it. I mean, you probably can get some collaboration on the school side too. They probably are more advanced on the whole issue of getting people involved and engaged because they have the kids doing it. But I just think that if we're going to do it and we want it to be really town-wide and kind of influencing everybody's lives broadly, that it would be good to, yeah, sort of celebrate it. You know, like Acton Earth Day, or I don't like something. Who knows? But just
part of cleanup week or something like that.
But anyhow, but I give Dave Hahn credit for that idea. He's not going to say anything. But yeah, and then if you could sort of, yeah, try to make the definition of sustainability a little bit more comprehensible, because I know this one that's here means allowing the needs of the present to be met in ways that don't eclipse the same for future generations. That was it's beautiful prose, but I didn't know what to make of. Yeah, I know. But otherwise, I'm glad you're moving forward, so.
Is it open for comment?
Yeah.
Thanks, Janet, for remembering. That was the general idea, is that, you know, you have all these, the DRB read it, and I think our general consensus was that it needs more concrete things and a little less fluff. You know, everybody wants to be green, but what the heck does that mean? So there's obviously a lot of constituencies involved in this. Somebody's interested in transportation, somebody's interested in energy, somebody's interested in saving trees. I mean, it'd be nice, the idea of an annual sort of get-together, or in the architectural world, we call it a charrette, where you get together and you solve a problem in a day or whatever. But you could get all these constituencies together, but the main point about it was that out of that would, say, be identified, I don't know, 3 major things we got to do in the next year. Otherwise, to me, it just goes sort of on, and people talk about it, but I think it would be a good chance to zero in on just a couple of things and get them done, and then have the summit the next year. So that was the general idea, is that you can, get some concrete ideas out there and do them, and then get 3 more, after that, or whatever number, but that was the idea.
Yes.
Wow, how far we've come. I want to make just I have a couple points and then a point of information. R factors. The old houses with the old wood have a very high R factor, which is, I don't really know what it means, but it's something about like how much heat it keeps in. And the old forests will never be again. And the new market demand-based forests are light wood, it grows fast, it falls apart quickly, it has a very low R factor, and that's why the carbon footprint cost of new houses is so high. The industry was reporting like 5 megatons, over the whole lifetime, and Finland and Canada are now coming out with studies saying it could be as high as 150 megatons. It could be as much as a new car per each new house. And that doesn't count the 2 or 3 cars that would come with the house. I'm saying just the carbon footprint of the materials of the house, because it needs to get refurbished so much more often than the old wood, old windows. You can do them once and they last for 100 years. No matter what you do to the new windows, they're still going to be replaced in 10 years. I love measuring stuff. You can't measure what you can't manage what you can't measure. And our land use group, I think, is hopefully going to come up with some metrics in terms of land use. I would love to measure the future carbon footprint based on our existing land use policies and zoning. And every time we consider a zoning change or a project, to say, is this going to increase and how much? And are we willing to live with that? Because it's an environmental subsidy every time we permit a project, every time we allow zoning change that increases our carbon footprint. And so taking that environmental subsidy as a serious decision and deciding whether we want to just address market demand smart growth with a capital S and a capital G that's determined by industry on what that means. Theoretically, it's going to do this and that, and then over time, what did it really do? Or take a real serious smart growth of a small local smart growth idea that has limits. To be smart about our growth as opposed to just implementing smart growth that's defined by somebody else, primarily industry. I personally reduce my carbon footprint 10% a year. And it's tough, but I measure it and I look for all the opportunities. I refuse the straws, I refuse the ice. We use 5 million straws in the United States alone every day. I'll get to it, I'll be almost done here. I think, yes, the difference between market demand and public necessity in terms of what we allow environmental subsidies for in our permitting and our zoning. The idea of public necessity, based on the preliminary discussions in the land use subcommittee or committee of Green Acton, if we only built what was actually necessity, a public necessity, and we kept at the same rate of growth of housing, we would meet the entire public necessity requirement in 3 years. Just think about that for a moment, as opposed to how the wait list for housing hasn't budged in 15 years that I've been looking at this stuff. So we've not met the need, and we're just getting worse. We're digging ourselves in. You guys have heard this all from me before. I think that's the end of my comments. Thank you very much for doing this work. It's really important work. We are in an environmental crisis. The 500-year flood in in Texas, they had 2 of them. Right now, we don't even put the 500-year flood zone on our GIS map. Think about that. So if we put the 500-year flood zone on our GIS map, it would cover probably half the town. So are we going to continue building in these flood zones? Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Anybody else?
Okay, so I'll go back.
She's cutting out. We were making very good time.
Sorry, this will be quick.
It's all right. You always have good ideas, Deborah.
I just wanted to reassure you that, so there's a small group of sort of editors in Green Acton who have taken input from 1 million people and are, doing very particular feedback on the draft policy, and I want you to know that there are lots of bullets in the prologue. Yes, that's it, thanks.
Thank you very much for all your work.
One other quick comment. The Land Use Committee is going to be holding a a get-together for people who care about housing to determine what we think public necessity is as opposed to market demand. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so we'll take this back and work on a new draft and then hopefully bring that back to the board and put it out, figure out, are we doing a public forum? Are we emailing it out? That kind of thing. So does that sound?
I forgot to say, I'm Deborah Symes, Concord
Oh,
Road,
yes.
but I have one quick question about that.
Yeah.
As I said, we're working on,
Yeah.
we sent you that sort of thematic thing, and then we're working on the more particular kind of feedback.
Right.
Do you have any, like, if you were going to guess when you're ready to do a second draft, is it safe to say it won't be in the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Safe to say, yeah. And I'll be calling you guys when I'm ready to work on the second draft, so stand by your phones. No, so yeah, I mean, I don't think this is going to move at lightning speed, but we will work on it.
No, you're taking on a lot, so thank you very much. Yeah. All right, and now we're on to the special town meeting, the warrant, opening and closing it. I guess we could talk about it, but Mr. Manager, do you have any comments or?
We have a draft warrant from the articles that we perceive that would be on there. You may note that we reserved Article number 3 for a citizen petition on the a ballot question on recreational marijuana. As of about 3 or 4 o'clock this afternoon, the petition was turned in with some 280 signatures. They haven't been vetted yet by the town clerk's office, but I assume they've met the 100 that would require to get it on the ballot. So even though we kind of highlighted Article 3, they have in fact turned it in. The rest, Article 4, is the so-called purchase or the purchase of the Reinowitz property. There are several zoning articles and a few consent, like Article 8, under the Municipal Modernization Act. It is now required that all our revolving funds be defined by bylaw. So we will have to have a Chapter Y defining our revolving funds. We put that under consent. Article 9 also consents. It's been questioned in court whether, without a bylaw, whether the animal control officer has the power to enforce the animal control bylaw or the Commonwealth's animal control bylaw. So that would do that. And then we have a couple, Article 10, abandoning a road easement on Faulkner Hill Road, accepting a sidewalk easement on Adeline Way, Article 11, and Article 12, accepting an access easement on Mohegan Lane. Those are all consent. So the main issues, obviously, the school articles, the 2 marijuana issues, the moratorium, the citizen petition, and the purchase of the Reinowitz property, then the zoning articles.
And I would just mention that Amy Krishnamurthy said she can come to our next meeting, which is on the 13th, to talk about the school building project, which is good because I don't think I'm going to be able to get to any of their special meetings. And, you know, I figured that a number of us probably need to hear about it, not necessarily Katie, but, and I feel as if I've heard about it repeatedly, but it would be good to have a presentation about certain articles before we develop our positions.
The 13th would be the last meeting before we go to press on the warrant, and then so that would be the evening we would have to take positions, assign articles to whomever, things like that.
And then the other thing is I need to talk to the planning board chairman to see if maybe he or somebody can come to do some of these zoning bylaw articles. I need to talk to him about the marijuana moratorium article because he said he doesn't know anything about it except that the board put it on the warrant. So I'm probably going to go to that hearing and help out with that. But I know, Peter, you had an issue you wanted to bring up, and I know Dave Martin had sent us something about the South Acton parking lot article.
Right, I have a couple of comments, actually, on number 10. I live on Faulkner Hill Road, and so I know the people who have proposed that article, so I will be recusing myself from any discussion about that. But on number 7, it was my understanding that the selectmen had complete control over the warrant and could either put articles on the warrant or not put articles on the warrant, as we determined. I think we've had a recommendation from, I may be wrong about this, but at least the train station committee and the HDC, that they don't feel that this article ought to even be on the warrant for various reasons. But we got an email today from town council's office that says if an individual has proposed a warrant article, a zoning article for the warrant, and this came out of a single individual in South Acton, that it probably has to be on the warrant, although it's not entirely legally clear, but that's the town council's reading of the statute. So I think we have to put it on there, is the way I read that opinion.
Yeah, well, I'd asked council, because in my 40 years, I've never seen the selectmen not put a planning article on, and I just wanted to understand if there was a statute or not. I mean, the way he is defined it, where George Hall defined it, it's basically, there's no case law on it whatsoever. It's been a practice that if the planning board initiates a zoning article and they have a hearing, you know, typically the selectmen put it on the warrant and then it's debated at town meeting. It's a 2/3 vote. The selectmen don't agree, they can recommend against and things like that.
Did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to recommend we take off number 7, but it sounds like maybe we can't, so we can just deal with that in our recommendation, I guess. But it might be worth talking to the planning board, because if they've gotten this much feedback, it might be worth them considering whether or not they want to rescind that recommendation to put it on. And then my only other question was the placement of Articles 2 and 3. I understand 3 was probably put on there just to be after 2, as they're somewhat interrelated, but to me, I feel like 3 is definitely a citizen's petition and 2 was brought up more by citizens, although it ended up being a selectman article, and I'd prefer to see those kind of below the general articles that we're proposing, and they are, you know, 2 is a zoning bylaw, so I think it would make sense to at least go below the community preservation one. So, yeah, I would recommend we move those down under 7, 6 or 7 maybe. That's my only request.
Can you say that again, Katie?
I'm moving Articles 2 and 3.
To where?
Underneath.
After 7?
After 7. Move them before the consent agenda.
Because they're really, typically we put citizens petitions towards the end generally, and I think that's a zoning one. Number 2 is a zoning one, so it should go with zoning.
And that way, because I assume that the chairman, the planning board chairman's going to have to present all of those.
Yeah, right.
Although I would be glad to help them, but, you know.
Also on Article 7, and David mentioned it during citizen comments, I mean, the board could also entertain an amendment to Article 7 for site plan special permit requirement as well.
Yeah, there just were a lot of comments that like it needs more study in general, so right now I'm disinclined to support it, amendment or no, but I think it's...
my problem is I don't know enough about it, so I didn't go to the hearing, and, you know, I've read it, and I'm just thinking, well, this looks like it's one person, in the interest of one person, but I don't really understand why the planning board recommended it. So I haven't had a chance to talk to the chairman, because I was going to call him over the weekend, except that I had no voice at all. And I figured that I might scare him if I tried to call him. Anyhow.
Janet,
yeah.
I did go to the hearing, and it was not by special permit as originally presented, but they agreed to have it by special permit, and it would be the planning board who would do the special permit.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions from the board? All right, audience.
Okay, first of all, I think that this was not proposed by an individual, but proposed by staff. For an individual to propose something, they have to go get signatures at the supermarket. So this was proposed by staff to alleviate an issue of non-enforcement. Gordon Richards is doing something illegally. The other guys, Good News, whatever they are, Garage, they're doing something illegally. And the fix was to propose this zoning change that somehow it would make well this situation down in South Acton. And I respect the conflict that we're in, but I feel like if we haven't enforced all of this time, we can not enforce for a little while longer while we figure it out, as opposed to trying to bully us into voting for this so that we can avoid some big, huge suit or something like that, or some kind of, you know, problem with the town breaking the law. And so I feel like, you know, effectively, this will incentivize the leveling of all of South Acton to provide parking. And SATSAC and the others, they know, no matter how much parking you put in, it's still not going to satisfy the quote-unquote demand, but are we responsible for satisfying the market demand, or is the rest of the region that hasn't satisfied their housing or other social compact, we have to take care of ourselves too. And so, you know, neighbors will be able to plow down their house and put down the parking, and there's no criteria under which these applications would be approved by. And so it's very early for this. I think I don't think it's fair to suggest that we have to do this because of some case law or some recommendation by staff, lawyers. I think that the answer has to be something a little bit more clever to satisfy all of the problems that this has introduced. And perhaps it is to just go to town meeting and vote it down. But I feel like there are other sort of infrastructural issues here where staff is presenting these things and recommending for them without taking into consideration all of the other things. Like this was proposed by Roland at the planning board meeting without talking to SATSAC or the HDC or any of the other parties involved. And so having staff promote a zoning article, I don't think is an appropriate use of planning time. Planning should be used, I think, to satisfy all of our needs in the community as opposed to one person's need. Thank you.
Okay, I'm here for the same number 7. I just want to verify that I wrote a rather lengthy memo this morning and sent it to the BOS. I assume I CC'd especially Peter, but I assume everybody got it. I think that sort of summarizes the issue here, is that it's a warrant article that has no backup. I mean, there's no studies, there are no statistics. We don't know whether 3 owners might do this or 33. We don't know whether it'll create 10 spaces or 250. So until you have some facts on the table and do some scenarios, to me, it's not a good example of planning. There's no planning. I would look to the planning department to produce something, or if they can't do it, that they'll hire a consultant to figure out where the parking should go, if it should go. And it's not just parking spaces. I mean, we're talking about very peculiar type of parking spaces. It's not like a mall where people come and go and there's a sort of flow during the day. This is a big load in the morning and a big load at night. So the spaces are directly related to how much volume, traffic volume, are they going to create at those times. So as far as I know, there's no analysis of, say, the light at School Street and 27. If you add 200 car parking spaces in that area, what happens to that intersection? Does it go from being a C level to an F? Who knows? So to me, it's a very unstudied, reactionary article to one person's problem. And frankly, if Gordon Richards has spaces, maybe he should be looking into leasing them to the town. You know, he could enter a long-term agreement with the town and gets to lease them out. The town takes a cut for managing the lot, because right now, as you know, only the municipality controls the commuter spaces. And I think that's a good idea, because you'll have complete chaos otherwise with no, I mean, if you read my memo, you'll get the idea of what could happen. And if someone wants to study this and bring it forth later, that would be good. But I urge you guys to go to the planning board with perhaps my memo. I haven't sent it to them, but I think it lays out 3 or 4 good arguments about why it shouldn't be done. And I would urge you to urge the planning chairman to withdraw the article. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, anybody else? Yep. Oh.
Hi, I'm David Martin on High Street. I'd like to complain a little bit about the process here. And I will admit I've only been to a handful of planning board meetings in the time I've been in Acton, so it may be my naivete with regard to the process. But I went to this meeting and first of all advocated against the parking facilities being allowed by right. And then the public hearing portion of the meeting was closed, and we were not allowed to make any other comments on the articles that they were adopting for the warrant. And the article as proposed has no criteria to judge these things. I have no idea what the article even means. And so we went from, as far as I know, and I saw this on the planning board's agenda, and so I went to this meeting, and we went from a proposed article for town meeting to having it on the warrant in the matter of an hour, right? And there was very little time for input. As David said, there's been no studies of the ramifications of this, and I don't understand how we got here. I mean, when you guys put something on the warrant, you can go to 3 successive Board of Selectmen meetings and give input on any one of the 3 meetings. We went in, in the matter of an hour of having this proposed, and it's on the warrant, and it seems like there's nothing we can do about it. We can't take it off. We can't, it's just a bad process in my mind.
Thank you, David. I mean, the thing we could do is if there's no way we can take it off, we could always vote not to recommend it and then explain the reasons for it. But, I mean, I obviously need to talk to the chairman, so.
I thought you were the chairman of the planning board.
I do talk to myself a lot, but that wasn't what I was talking about.
I was going to say, I think that the municipality leasing it until we figure out what we want to do, I think that's a grand idea, because currently the municipality can operate parking lots, and so we could enter a lease with Gordon and the other people that want to, and dictate.
We've had discussions for at least 3 years with Gordon,
leasing,
purchasing. We have an offer on the table with him. I don't know what else to say. We've been active on it, so.
Well, I think we should take this off of the thing somehow. And so, are you saying, Steve, that that the Board of Selectmen can't vote to take it off the warrant?
Well, it's not as. I mean, let me just read what Council sent me this morning. Just let me find. Excuse me. What he said is the prevailing view is to treat that request as a binding legal obligation on the part of the Selectmen to place the amendment on the warrant. So it's the prevailing view. It's not law. There's no, as he points out a little later, there's no legal precedent. There's no court case. It's just been practice. And I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've never seen the Board of Selectmen ever pull a zoning article for warrant. So, I mean, the board could pull it. I mean, I don't know what the ramifications of it would be if you did, but.
If we close it tonight, on the 13th, could we still pull it if we get further clarification from?
Well, you got to remember, it is the BOS warrant, so you could actually open the warrant again on the 13th if you wanted to do something.
So I think it might be worthwhile to close it for the sense of, the reason we usually close is so there's no new citizens petitions or other warrant articles brought, but that doesn't preclude us from removing something. And so I think we spend the next 2 weeks talking to the chair of the planning board and maybe getting some clarification from council to see if either planning would be willing to withdraw this, and if they understand that there might be a sense that the board would vote not to recommend, I think they might be willing or understand that. And if SATSEC and HCC are opposed, I think they'll hear that. And if they don't, we can try to get a sense from council if there's a way to move it. But I think in the meantime, we close it, but it doesn't mean that this is the final thing. We've also had times where we've just passed over articles, so we could also go that route where our recommendation is just to pass over the article.
That was going to be my question, is whether if we open and close today, with the article still in, if on the 13th we could just, if we found enough information, justification, we could just pull it out, because it won't, it has to go.
Up until when you sign the warrant,
Yeah,
you can do it.
yeah, okay. I'm comfortable with that.
I agree with that approach as well.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to close the warrant for a special town meeting on December 4th.
Second.
Katie moves and Joan seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstaining. Thank you. Okay, we done with this? Okay, consent agenda. With the last gasp here. Oh, good, it's short. One-day alcoholic beverage license, Congregation Beth Elohim, November 4, 2017. Number 9, committee appointment, William Hill, Open Space Committee. Number 10, Regional Transportation Advisory Council, appointment of Acton representative. Number 11, refund request, Building Department. Number 12, accept gifts, Council on Aging. Gifts totaling $1,400 for building furnishings in the senior center. Item 13, Bike MS Minuteman Ride, July 14, 2018. Whoa, that's way in the future. And item 14, request to dispose of obsolete materials, Acton Memorial Library.
Motion to approve consent agenda items 8 through 14.
Second.
Katie moves, Joan second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Reluctant second. Katie moves and either Jing Zhang or Joan seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Great.